Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into Only the Paranoid Survive by Andrew Grove. You shared this book because you're looking for insights on navigating moments of massive change, and let me tell you, this book is packed with them.
It really is a classic for a reason. Grove, as the CEO of Intel, was at the forefront of some of the most intense technological shifts in history, so he knows a thing or two about how to survive and even thrive in periods of immense upheaval.
Okay, so let's get right to it. What exactly I see as a strategic inflection point, and why should we care?
Grove describes it as a moment when the fundamentals of a business are about to change. It's not just a little shift, it's a complete transformation of the landscape, almost like the ground is shifting beneath your feet.
And he keeps coming back to this idea of a 10x change, right?
Exactly. It's not just about things changing, it's about them changing by an order of magnitude. Think about the difference between a gentle stream and, well, class 6 rapids. It's whitewater rocks everywhere, and you're definitely going to get wet.
Wow, that's a vivid image. So these 10x changes are the real deal, and Grove argues that they're happening all the time across all sorts of industries.
Absolutely. He breaks them down into categories, things like a 10x shift in competition. Imagine what happened to small-town retailers when Walmart came to town. Or a 10x change in technology, like the arrival of sound and movies container shipping. Or, more recently, the internet.
Okay, those are some big examples, but how do you even know you're in one? It seems like they could sneak up on you.
That's the tricky part. Grove talks about something called strategic dissonance. It's that feeling when what you're saying and doing don't match up anymore.
Interesting. So like if a company's publicly saying they're all about innovation, but then internally they're resistant to any new ideas.
That's a great example. Or you see companies making big, unrelated acquisitions, almost like they're trying to distract themselves from the core problem. Grove even points to senior managers getting overly involved in charity work or side projects. It's all about avoiding the hard decisions.
So strategic dissonance is like a warning sign, a signal that something big is brewing.
It can be. It's often rooted in psychology, a form of denial where we cling to the past even when the world around us is changing dramatically.
And Grove has firsthand experience with this, right? Didn't Intel go through a near-death experience with their memory chip business?
They did. They were getting absolutely hammered by Japanese competitors losing money hand over fist. And what's fascinating is that there were huge internal debates about what to do. Some people wanted to double down on memory chips, build a massive factory and take the Japanese head on. Others wanted to get out of the memory business entirely and focus on something new.
So what happened? How did Intel navigate that critical moment?
It wasn't a clean top-down decision. What's really interesting is that middle managers, through their day-to-day decisions, were already shifting resources towards microprocessors, even while senior management was still clinging to the memory chip business. It was almost an organic shift bubbling up from below.
So it was like the company itself was sensing the shift, even if the people at the top weren't quite ready to acknowledge it.
Exactly. And Grove talks about the importance of this kind of dynamic dialectic, a back and forth between top-down guidance and bottom-up insights, where senior managers are open to ideas coming from the periphery of the organization, not just the usual channels.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But how do you actually encourage that kind of environment where people feel comfortable speaking up and sharing ideas, even if they challenge the status quo?
Well, Grove has some specific advice on that, and
Yeah.
it all starts with, well, Grove is a big believer in fostering what he calls constructive confrontation.
Yeah, okay.
It's not about being aggressive or disrespectful, but about creating a culture where people are encouraged to challenge assumptions, debate different viewpoints, and ultimately arrive at better decisions.
I like that. It's about channeling that energy in a positive way.
Yeah.
But how do you make sure it doesn't devolve into chaos or infighting?
That's where leadership comes in. Grove talks about the importance of setting clear expectations, establishing ground rules for debate, and making it clear that everyone's opinion is valued, even if they disagree with the prevailing view.
Okay, so it's about creating a safe space for those dissenting voices, those helpful Cassandras, as Grove calls them, to be heard.
Yeah.
But it's not just about listening, is it? You also have to be willing to act on those insights.
Absolutely. And that's where the paranoid part of the title comes in.
Right.
It's not about being constantly afraid, but about being alert, questioning assumptions, and being willing to make tough decisions even when they go against the grain.
It reminds me of something you said earlier about Intel's experience with the internet. Grove wrote the book before the internet really took off, but he dedicated a whole chapter to exploring it, trying to figure out if it was a signal or noise, a threat or a promise.
It's a remarkable example of his foresight and his willingness to embrace the unknown. He even suggested setting up a team to build the best possible internet appliance that didn't use an Intel chip, just to see if they could disrupt their own business from within.
That's some next-level paranoia right there.
Yeah.
But it makes sense. If you can't disrupt yourself, someone else will.
Exactly. And that's the key takeaway here. Strategic inflection points are often driven by forces outside of our control. But how we respond to them, how we adapt and evolve, is ultimately up to us.
This is all starting to click for me. But I have to admit, it can feel a bit overwhelming, especially when you're in the thick of it. What advice would you give someone who's facing a potential strategic inflection point right now?
First, I'd say don't panic. Take a deep breath and try to assess the situation as objectively as possible. What are the key forces at play? What are the potential scenarios? And most importantly, what are your options?
So it's about taking a step back, getting some perspective, and making sure you're not just reacting emotionally to the situation.
Right. And then I'd say start gathering information. Talk to people on the front lines, those who are closest to the change. Read industry reports, attend conferences. Do whatever you can to get a better understanding of what's happening and what it might mean for your business.
So embrace those helpful Cassandras, those people who might have a different perspective, even if it's not what you want to hear.
Exactly. They might be seeing things that you're missing. And then once you have a better understanding of the landscape, you can start experimenting.
Okay, so that's where the dynamic dialectic comes in. Trying out different approaches, seeing what works, and adjusting your course as needed.
Precisely. And don't be afraid to fail. In fact, embrace failure as a learning opportunity. As Grove says, only the paranoid survive. And paranoia in this context means being willing to constantly challenge your assumptions and adjust your strategies based on new information.
This has been incredibly helpful. I feel like I'm starting to get a handle on this whole strategic inflection point thing.
I'm glad to hear that. It can be a lot to take in, but remember, the most important thing is to stay flexible, stay curious, and stay ahead of the curve.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about how companies can navigate strategic inflection points. But what about individuals? How can we apply these principles to our own careers?
That's a great question, and it's something Grodig addresses directly in the book. He actually has a whole chapter dedicated to career inflection points.
Oh, wow. I hadn't gotten to that part yet. What are some of the key takeaways from that chapter? What advice does he give for people who are facing a major career transition?
One of the most important pieces of advice he gives is to be proactive. Don't wait for the axe to fall.
Right.
Recognize the signs of change early on and start taking steps to adapt.
So it's about taking ownership of your own career, not just relying on your company to provide you with a path forward.
Absolutely. And that means being willing to learn new skills, step outside of your comfort zone, and network with people outside of your immediate circle.
It's almost like you need to become your own CEO, constantly evaluating your strengths and weaknesses and making strategic decisions about where to invest your time and energy.
That's a great analogy. And just like a CEO, you need to be willing to make tough decisions even if they're uncomfortable.
So if you see the writing on the wall, if you sense that your current role or industry is facing a major shift, don't be afraid to make a change, even if it means starting over in a new field.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to ask for help. Talk to mentors, career counselors, friends, family, anyone who can provide you with support and guidance during this transition.
It sounds like navigating a career inflection point can be just as challenging, if not more so, than navigating a business inflection point.
It can be, but it can also be incredibly rewarding. It's a chance to reinvent yourself, to explore new possibilities, and to ultimately create a career that's more aligned with your values and goals.
I love that. It's about turning a potential crisis into an opportunity for growth and transformation.
It is. And it's about remembering that change is inevitable. The question is, will we embrace it or be swept away by it?
Well said. And speaking of change, we were talking earlier about the internet and how Grove saw it as a potential 10x force that could disrupt entire industries. What were some of the specific ways he saw the internet changing things?
He talked about how it could transform the telecommunications industry, providing a much more cost-effective way to connect people and share information. He also saw the potential for it to disrupt the software industry, making it much easier to distribute software and potentially creating a whole new category of internet appliances.
It's amazing how prescient he was. He was basically predicting the rise of cloud computing and the app economy decades before they became mainstream.
He was, and he was also very aware of the potential downsides. He talked about the risk of commoditization, how the internet could make it harder for companies like Intel to differentiate themselves and maintain their pricing power.
So it's both a threat and an opportunity, just like any strategic inflection point.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to be able to see both sides of the coin, to understand both the potential risks and the potential rewards of any major change.
Okay, so going back to Intel for a second, how did Grove ultimately decide to approach the internet? Did he see it as more of a threat or an opportunity?
He acknowledged that it was a potential 10x force, something that could fundamentally change Intel's business. But instead of shying away from it, he decided to embrace it, to experiment with it, to try to understand how it could be both a threat and an opportunity.
And that's what led to Intel's investments in internet technologies and their eventual dominance in the server market, right?
Exactly. They were able to adapt, to evolve, to find new ways to leverage their core strengths in this new environment.
It's a great example of how embracing a strategic inflection point, even a potentially disruptive one, can lead to even greater success. But it's not just about the technology, right? It's also about the people.
Absolutely. Grove talks a lot about the importance of having the right people in place, people who are adaptable, curious, and willing to challenge the status quo.
So it's not just about hiring smart people. It's about hiring people who are comfortable with ambiguity, who are excited by change, who are willing to learn and grow.
Exactly. And it's about creating a culture where those people can thrive, where they're encouraged to experiment, to take risks, to share their ideas.
This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive. I feel like I have a much better understanding of strategic inflection points and how to navigate them, both in a business context and in my own career.
I'm glad to hear that. It's a complex topic, but one that's more relevant than ever in today's rapidly changing world.
I agree. And I think the key takeaway for me is that change is inevitable. The question is, will we be proactive and embrace it, or will we be reactive and get swept away by it?
That's a great way to put it. And I think Grove would agree that the choice is ultimately up to us.
Well, on that note, what are some final thoughts you want to leave our listener with today?
I think the most important thing to remember is that while change can be daunting, it can also be incredibly liberating. It's a chance to break free from old patterns, to explore new possibilities, and to ultimately create a future that's more aligned with our values and aspirations.
That's a powerful message, and one that I think we can all take to heart.